Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vedya Dravinam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Namadeva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Namadeva Deva. Jai Guru. Yata Sarvani Bhutani Pratibhanti Stitani Cha Yatraivo Pashamam Yanti Tasmai Satyatmane Namaha. Ganesh, will you chant for us this evening?
Yeah, no problem, Jim.
And Mark, what chapter are we on? What verse are we on?
We're in chapter 10. It's page 100, verse 1920, I believe.
All right. Would you help us out, please, Ganesh?
Dashura Tapaha, the austerity of Dashura. Vasishta Uvacha Bahu Prakara Sa Srishtihi Nasyam Tu Niyama Kvachit Jangamaya Swarupasya Varnana Pyapadeshatah Dashurakhyayikam Rama Varnyamanam Maya Shruno. That creation is of various kinds.
So
Indeed,
it starts off with Vasishta saying, doesn't it?
Yeah, Vasishta said that creation is of various kinds. Indeed, there is no regularity or certainty in this anywhere. Rama, by way of information on the description of the nature of the illusory world, or as an example of the nature of the illusion constituting this universe, hear the story of Dashura, which is narrated by me.
So what the scripture is saying is a very important point. This phenomenal world is imagination. And actually, it's imagination upon imagination upon imagination. In the beginning, we tend to think this world is knowable. That's a table, that's a chair, that's a sofa. God, mystery. And it's actually the other way around. God, which is the self, yourself, is the only thing we will ever know for sure. It is this world that is mysterious. It is this world that comes about by means of imagination. And it's constantly changing, and it's illusory. What we think is there is not there. And there are layers of that illusion. And so now we're going to get the story of Dashura, which will be a wonderful example of this. Going on.
Dashurakhyo mune putraha magadheshu vane vasan mata pitruviyogena shokamagno turodaha. The son of a sage by name Dashura, residing in a forest in the land of the Magadhas, steeped in sorrow due to the death of his mother and father, verily wept.
So, seems like an ordinary thing to do. We don't know how his parents died, but they're dead. And he is filled with sorrow at the death of his parents. Seems like a normal, ordinary thing. So let's see what happens. Going on.
Tam tada shvasa yamasa asharira vanadevata rishiputra mahapragnya kimagnya ivarodishi. Then an incorporeal forest deity consoled him thus: son of a sage, very wise one, why do you weep like an ignorant man?
Yes. So he is the son of a sage, meaning he's been taught this truth from childhood. And there he is boo-hooing. And the celestial spirit says, why are you grieving? So we have this teaching. It goes back very, very long. In the second chapter of the Gita, in the 11th verse, Krishna begins the real teaching by saying, you grieve for whom you should not grieve, though you speak words of wisdom. The wise grieve neither for the living nor the dead. That's hard teaching for someone who's just lost their parents. And then the whole rest of the second chapter goes into why that's reasonable. So let's see what the celestial spirit says. Going on.
Sarva daivedrishi sadho samsarasya sthiti chala jayate jivyate paschat avashyam cha vinashyati. Avashyam cha vinashyati. Virtuous one, the condition of worldly existence is always fickle or transitory like this. One is born and brought up, then he perishes certainly.
So Krishna again in Gita says they have a beginning and an end, these bodies of the embodied. Why grieve over the inevitable? Everybody dies. I have news for you. You're dying. It's only a matter of time when it happens. This is the fact of life. Where our doubts come in, twofold. First of all, what dies? And who am I? Do I die when the body dies? Is mummy dead when mummy's body dies? That's the big question. Death. Shakespeare calls it that undiscovered country, that undiscovered bourne from which no traveler ever returns. Nobody comes back and seems to say, oh, it's great. Dying is fun. It's like a roller coaster. Let's do it again. Don't get that. But here the Spirit is saying, first of all, understand the impermanence of everything in life. Now, how do we use that information? I had a very dear friend who was a roommate back in the mid-'80s during the time of AIDS. And he was diagnosed with AIDS in 1986. He survived another 2 years and died at 1988. And in that 2 years, he intuitively discovered an amazing truth. That many people, when they get a terminal diagnosis, do. This isn't a rehearsal. This is your life. Cherish it. Some people, when they get a diagnosis of a disease, they crawl into bed and pull up the covers. They're too afraid to step out. Others understand. You know, I've only got 2 years to live. I'm going to take the cruise I never did. I'm going to make peace with all the people I've been pissed off at. I'm going to treasure spending some quality time, just having dinner with a friend. It's a gorgeous day. I'm going to enjoy walking outside. I may never get to do this again. So for Perry, he was interviewed by a magazine, and he said, I finally learned how to live. Now, if I had the choice of living a longer life and not learning this lesson, or learning this lesson and having a shorter life, I'd rather take the latter. That's how important he felt it was. So the awareness of the transient nature of life invites us to live with death on our shoulder. Cherish every moment, because it may be your last, literally. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Evam ashvasito dhairyam alabhya kritavan asau paschyatyam paitrikam karma tato brahmena karmana tapasa shrotriyo bhutva drishtva shuddham Dharatalam Ugrena Tapasa Vahnem Aradhum Shuddhamandalam Yato Napnomi Vrikshanam Uparisthiktirastu me. Thus consoled and taking courage, he performed the subsequent rite in honor of the deceased father. Then by Vedic rites and by austerity, having become one well versed in sacred learning, and having known the world to be impure, he decided as follows: as long as I do not obtain a pure place for worshipping the fire god by severe austerity, let my residence be on the top of trees.
So he's focused on ritual. So he does the funerary rites for his father, and we assume his mother as well. And because he wants to perform these Brahminical rituals and do it in a way that's very pure, he can't seem to find any way to do it. So he decides the best way is to live on top of a tree. Climbs up this tree, lives on top of a tree. Why he thought this would be pure, I do not know, but that's what he chose to do. That's our story. Going on.
Iti samprarthya samprapte nipavrikshe latagrahe dridham padmasanam badhva digbhaya pratyahritatmana ajnata paramarthena dashavarshani tatra cha gavashva narame dhadyai manasai vayajat suran. Desiring thus when he arrived at a bower, surrounded by creepers, assuming Padmasana or a yogic pose of meditation, firmly on a nipa tree, with the mind withdrawn from all directions, but with the highest truth unknown, he made oblations to the demigods by his mind or mentally through cow, horse, and human sufferings for human offerings for 10 years there.
So he climbs up the tree, and of course he can't have his ritual objects on top of the tree. So he decides to sit on a bough or on a branch and in lotus posture. And inside his mind, he does all these Brahminical rituals mentally. Now, part of our little story here, one of the things the scriptures will say that is, if you do the sacrifice in the physical, you get the physical benefits of it. If you only do the mentally, you get the mental benefits. So let's see what happens to Dashura, because he's not there on the ground doing his Agnihotra, he's on top of a tree doing it mentally. Thinks it's going to be purer that way. Let's see what happens. Going on.
Kalena malatam yate vitate tasya chetasi balat avatatarantah jnanam atma prasadajam. In his mind, when it became stainless in course of time and extended or accomplished, knowledge born of mental tranquility perforce entered within.
So even though he was not a knower of the highest truth by direct experience, his mind became pure because of its single pointedness. Now let's see what happens as the result of this chitta shuddha, this purification of his mind. Going on.
Putra bodhanam the awakening of the sun. Vanadevi tatah tam cha sutam kantamayachata. Then the forest goddess begged of him a dear or lovely son.
So after this 10 years, he's on top of the tree with a stainless mind, and this forest spirit wants a baby. So let's see if he does the mufti pufti with her and see what happens going on.
Dashuro dayaya tasyai pushpam datva vyasarjayat atha dirghena kalena tatra sa vanadevata dvadashabdamubadaya sutam munimupayayau. Dashura, out of compassion, having given her a flower, sent her away. Then, after a long time, that forest goddess, taking with her a 12-year-old son, approached the sage there in that forest.
So giving her a flower is metaphor. It means that they did the mufti pufti. So then she goes off. He comes back. She comes back with a 12-year-old son in 12 years. He's still on top of the tree, by the way. Going on.
Krito mayaisha sarvasam kalanamapi kovidah jnanam tvasya bhavaneva kripayopa tishatvati taya proktah tada putram bahudhaivam abhodayat. She said, "This son of mine has been made proficient in all the arts by me. May your honor himself teach him, out of compassion, the supreme knowledge." Thus told by her, Dashura then taught his son in many ways.
So she brings the kid back and has Dashura take him on as student as well as son, teaching not only the various rituals according to his caste, but also the highest knowledge. Going on.
Dashura Vacha. Dashura said, Swotha naman kaschet vikyato bhuvanatraye yasyanushasanam sarve shirobhik dharayanti cha. There is a certain king named Swotha, literally self-arising, renowned in the three worlds, whose commands all bear on their heads, that is, all respect highly.
So he's starting the story. Once upon a time, there was a king named Swotha, which means self-arising. And everybody does what he says. Everybody obeys him. Let's see what happens. Going on.
Trayastasya mahabaho deha viharana kshamaha jagat akramya tishthanti hyuttama dhamma madhyamaha. Three are the bodies of the mighty armed one, which are capable of going about for pleasure. They, the highest, the lowest, and the middling, exist extending over the world.
So, Swotha is talking about these three bodies, the highest, the middling, and the lowest. Let's see what those bodies are. Going on.
व्योमन्येव हि जातोऽसौ तत्रैव च स्थितिं गतः चतुर्दशमहारथ्यं नगरं तेन निर्मितम्. He was born only in the sky, and there itself did he attain to his position. A city with 14 highways was built by him.
So he was born in the sky. Here again, the word is akasha, which also means space. Does he use akasha? I think he used the other word for sky. I'm having a senior moment.
He used Vyoma.
Vyoma, yes.
Vyomaha.
So he was born in the sky, actual sky. And so you get the idea what he's talking about is the power of imagination, the power of sankalpa. Going on.
Vapi saptaka bhushadyam deepadvaya virajitam nana pavaraka srishtaha navadvara vibhushitaha. The city, which was rich in its ornaments in the form of 7 wells and illuminated by 2 lights or lamps. There, various inner apartments were created, adorned with 9 openings.
So what is this city? We'll find out. Some of you may have guessed already what it is. Going on.
Teshvanta vividham kridam karotyesha mahipatihi nirmayanta nirmayanyat puram gatva tata utthaya dadhavati. Within them, this king performs various kinds of sport, creating another city, going there and getting up from there or leaving it. He runs.
So this king Swotha, he can create another city and he runs to that one back and forth. Let's see what happens.
Svenaiva vyavahrityasau kadachit paribhuyate mudameti kadachitcha dukhito smiti rochati. By his own action, he is overcome at some time or other. Sometimes he obtains joy, and at other times he mourns, I am distressed.
So this king isn't always happy. And sometimes he's overcome, goes unconscious. Has happiness, has sorrow. You getting the idea who this king is? Keep going.
Sankalpa prabhavaha, the power of ideation, thought, or desire.
Yes.
Putra uvacha, the son said, ka esha bhavata proktah swotha nama mahipatihi. Who is this king named Swotha, mentioned by your honor?
Now we get the exposition, the explanation of the parable. Going on.
Dashura uvacha, Dashura said, idam samsara samsthanam evam te kathitam maya. This configuration of worldly existence has thus been narrated to you by me.
So it's a parable. It's not about a real king living in the country over yonder. It's about worldly existence, samsara. And it's been explained by means of a parable. Going on.
Paramat nabhaso jatah sankalpasvotha uchyate jayate swayamevasau swayameva viliyate. The idea or thought born of the supreme sky of consciousness is called swotha, self-arising. He is born of his own accord or spontaneously, and he is dissolved or disappears of his own accord.
So why does the sense of individuality come into the world? And what makes it dissolve and go away? It's its nature. It swota, it self-arises. Where? In the space of consciousness itself. Well, why, Jim? I don't know. What's he get out of it? I don't know. It just happens. Spontaneously. By the infinite's Maya Shakti, it seems to be an individuality, appears in this phenomenal world, runs around doing its thing for lifetimes and lifetimes, then finally is drawn to an interior life. And at one auspicious moment, the dawn of knowledge, poof, it's gone. Going on.
Shunye Vyomanite Nedam Nirmitam Trijagatpuram Chaturdashatra Lokahi Deepo Chandra Divakaro. In the void sky of consciousness, this city or abode of the three worlds was constructed by him. 14 indeed are the regions here, corresponding to the 14 highways in the allegory. The two lights are the moon and the sun. Note, according to Indian mythology, there are 7 higher regions or worlds above the earth and 7 below it. The whole complex constitutes the universe consisting of the 3 broad subdivisions, that is, the heaven, the earth, and the nether region.
Yes. And most religious mythologies talk about non-physical realms, beneficent ones and inauspicious ones, and spirits, beings, angels, demons that populate them. Again, this is just the paradigm we find in classic Hindu mythology. Christianity has its collection of, thrones and dominions and powers and archangels and angels, all that sort of stuff. So these are the 14 highways. Going on.
Jim, question, is it archangel or is it archangel?
I've always heard archangel. It's a Greek word.
Okay. Kridartham atmanah chitraha deha pavaraka kritaha swayaiva cheshtaya dukhi sukhi chaiva swacheshtaya swacheshtaya. For his own pleasure, various bodily inner apartments were made by him. He is afflicted by his own action and also happy by his own action.
So, there's the 9 holes of the body, 2 eyes, 2 ears, your nostrils, your mouth, front and back holes. And then the jiva, the sense of individuality, sports with the world, enjoying some environments and regretting others, suffering and joy, and then goes to sleep. So that's what he's talking about, the biography of the sense of individuality, the ego sense. Going on.
Tamasattvam rajascheti tasya dehatraya smritaha tamo rupo hi sankalpo nitya prakrita cheshtaya param kripanatam etya prayati krimikitatam. Tamas, or inertia, ignorance, and darkness. Sattva, or harmony, knowledge, and light. And rajas, or activity, passion, and agitation, are said to be his three bodies. Idea or thought of the nature of tamas, reduced to the state of extreme wretchedness by its continual natural action, goes forth to the state of worms and insects.
So if the three worlds or three bodies are the tamasic mind, the rajasic mind, the sattvic mind, and if he's tamasic, here this particular scripture says you go to the world of animals and bugs, things like that. We don't have to believe in that if you live a life that is tamasic. Interesting things happen. What if you are so tamasic you can't open your mail and therefore you don't pay your bills? What happens? What if you get a parking ticket and you're so tamasic you can't get around to paying it? What happens? What if you're a renter and the first of the month comes around and you just can't get up the inertia, the ability to pay the rent? What happens? You lose a job and you're so depressed you can't go look for another one. What eventually happens? All you have to do is walk out into the park and see people living in the tents. We may not call them animals, bugs, or insects. They're human beings which deserve our compassion. But that does not mean their lives are not pretty wretched. Such is the fruit of tamas. Going on.
Sattvarupo hi sankalpo dharma jnana parayanah adura kevali bhavam swarajyam adhitisthati. Thought or idea which is of the nature of sattva, devoted to virtue and knowledge, resorts to identification with the self-refulgent Brahman.
Yes.
Resorts to identification with a self-refulgent Brahman, the proximate state of aloneness or absoluteness.
So, in contrast to tamas, for the mind that has cultivated sattva, when it's mixed sattva, there's still an ego sense, but you have a life that's happy, you tend to do virtuous things, non-attached, content, and then through abhyasa, vairagya cha, practice, and renunciation, when the mind has attained pure sattva, then your self nature is evident. and the illusory nature of the world is obvious. Going on.
Rajo रूपो हि संकल्पो लोकसंव्यवहारवान् परितिष्ठति संसारे पुत्रदारानुरञ्जितः. Thought or idea which is of the nature of rajas, possessed of the affairs of the world, abides much in worldly existence, pleased by children and wife.
So the state of mind of the person who's predominantly rajasic is engaged with this world, becomes a householder, has lots of kids, gets jobs, promotions, buys a house, gets fancy clothes, goes on trips, engaged and involved with the things of this world. So he spelled out the kind of life that happens depending on whether the mind is predominantly tamasic, rajasic, or sattvic. Going on.
Trividham tu parityajya sankalpa paramashnute sankalpasya layah karyah niyamya manasa manah. Discarding the three kinds of thought or imagination, one attains to the supreme. Restraining the mind by the mind, the dissolution of thought or imagination should be effected.
Read that again. I didn't quite get clear on the first phrase. Say it again.
Basically, dropping the gunas. Discarding the three
Discarding
kinds
or
of
regarding. What was the first word?
discarding the three
sorry,
kinds of thought.
I thought you said regarding. Okay. Read it again, please, for me.
Discarding the three kinds of thought or imagination, one attains to the supreme. Restraining the mind by the mind, the dissolution of thought or imagination should be effective.
So again, sankalpa here means this yearning, this wanting, this I'm going to get something. So we have inauspicious desires, sankalpas. We have those that are in the middle, relatively neutral, and we have the auspicious ones. Even spiritual practice is impelled by desire. That's what makes us want to do the spiritual practices. These are all sankalpa. And when the mind is sattvic, again, Shankara's most famous image is the ego is like a corpse on a funeral pyre. And your mumukshutva, your desire for liberation, is the stick that you use to stir the funeral pyre to make sure the body is completely cremated. And in the end, you throw the stick on too. Now, the second half of this is an oblique reference to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The second one is so famous, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is the restraining of the mind stuff from forming whirlpool-like configurations, vrittis. Can be meant to mean when all thought has ceased. Can also mean when you don't spin on stuff. We can also think of it, the mind being only three thoughts. I think I'm an individual person. I need stuff to be happy. And I have kartavya, the impulse to do obligatory actions to get from point A to point B. This restraining of the mind is to see the unreality of that paradigm. Let it go. This is yoga. This is freedom. This is getting beyond the play of the gunas. Next verse.
यदि वर्षसहस्राणि तपश्चरति दारुणं नान्यः कश्चिद् उपायोऽस्ति संकल्पोपशमात्कृते निस्संकल्पो यथा प्राप्त व्यवहारपरो भव. Even if one performs fierce or severe austerity for thousands of years, there is no other means for realization of the Supreme Spirit except the pacification or cessation of thought or imagination. Be without wish or imagination, intent on such occupation or work suitable to circumstances.
So, what we need to do is give up the vancha, the wanting, the spreha, the longing, the kama, the craving. Giving up all ego-prompted desire. I'll be happy when, it'll be better if, or better different. Then what I like to say, you put the robot, the body, mind, intellect on automatic pilot. Let it function in the world according to its prarabdha karma, performing its activity suitable to circumstances, with no identification with it and no attachment to the outcome. This is the liberated personality. This is the Jivan Mukta. This is the one who's free. Any thoughts on this? Going on.
चिदचेत्योन्मुखत्वं हि याति संकल्प संक्षये विकल्प जालमुत्सृज्य प्राप्यते सुखमद्वयम्. On the destruction of thought or imagination, consciousness indeed goes to the state of not looking up to what is perceived or understood. That is, consciousness shines without objectification. Having given up the web of uncertainty or ignorance, the non-dual bliss is obtained.
Yes. The vikalpa jala, the web of vikalpa. Giving up the web of the tangle of thoughts. Let go of the compulsion to think. I like to phrase it, when you quit believing your mind. And anybody else's. I like to talk about the cosmic teeter-totter. The more we let go, the more we have peace, the more we surrender, the more we accept, the more we see the fundamental illusion of the world, the more we see the non-existence of the personal sense of self, the greater and greater our peace. The more we're attached, the more we need to be right, the more we protect, the more we defend, the more we're dealing with boundaries and needs, the less our serenity. You choose. The person of wisdom has given it all. And may be seen to be working in the world. On the outside, they look like every other person. Except you might get the reputation at the office of, oh, so-and-so. There's just no drama. We just love having them. No stress. Going on.
Putrovacha, the son said, Kadi kidrishastat sankalpaha katham utpadyate chasah katham cha vridhimayati katham chaisha vinashyati. Father, of what nature is thought or imagination? How is it produced? How does it attain growth? Also, how does it perish?
And again, this word sankalpa is almost impossible to translate. Here, the translator is using thought or imagination, but it also means wish, will, intention, desire to have something manifest. So now the sun is acting. What is its nature? Let's see what the answer is.
Dashurovacha, Dashura said, Anantasyatmatatvasya sattva samanya rupinah chitah chityon mukhatvam yat tat sankalpankuram viduh. That state of being intent on what is perceived or cognized, that is objectification of consciousness, which is unlimited, the self principle, and is of the nature of pure being or existence, equally is considered as the sprout of thought or imagination.
So here, Vedanta becomes very close to quantum physics. What the scripture is saying is the act of perceiving something, the act of contemplating something, literally is what reifies it and makes it material. Then on top of that come all the qualities. Do I think it's good? Do I think it's bad? Is it something I want? Is it something I want to get away from? Those are just more sankalpa that I attribute to it. And I like to go back to that. Again, I'm not a scientist, so I don't understand it well, but if I've understood the experiment, when they're dealing with light, if you don't measure the light, if you don't, I don't know if measurement's the right word. If you don't observe it with instruments and stuff like that, it behaves like energy. When you start to observe it, measure it, etc., it starts to behave like photons, like matter. It's the very act of contemplating it that makes it real. Did I understand that, those of you who are scientists?
When you look at it directly, if it's a quantum particle, it behaves as a particle. When you look at it indirectly, it behaves as a wave. Just that fact of us observing it makes it behave differently. It seems
Such as
to,
the entire world.
yeah, that was in the other book you had me read.
That is what we do. And of course, the more we dwell on it, the more real it becomes. So something practical, someone at work or your partner or on the bus says something that we interpret as unkind or a challenge, then the mind goes whoosh. And boy, does that become real. Then you go home and you in your mind. Doesn't that sound familiar?
Does for me.
And then the kind of sankalpa you carry as the substratum of your life. I'm thinking of people who, when they are on public transportation, that it's so frequently problematic and contentious. I'm not making this up. I cannot tell you how frequently someone at a bus stop, someone on the bus will sit next to me on BART, and all of a sudden we're talking about God. Why is that? Sankalpa. The mind is the world is the mind. It is the fact of knowing it, of ideation itself, that makes it, the word I would use is it becomes grossified. More useful word perhaps is it becomes concretized. It's like concrete being made. It's reified. It appears as real to me. If I quit believing in it, all of a sudden the world starts to get very ephemeral, very transparent.
You say reaffirmation or like reaffirming is what you mean? Like, like just.
The word I used was reified, not reaffirming.
Okay.
Look it up after class. All right, going on.
भावयन्ति चितिः चेत्यं व्यतिरिक्तिम् इवात्मनः संकल्पतामुपायाति बीजम् अंकुरताम् इव. The conscious mind, thinking of the cognized object as if it were separated from itself, arrives at the state of thought or imagination, just as the seed attains to the state of the sprout.
So, what he's talking about, the subtlest form of this, if you close your eyes and imagine something. So many classes I say visualize a mango or visualize a strawberry. So what you have done there, out of nothing, swota, comes the image. And it is consciousness itself that is forked into subject and object. And everything in this world appears grosser than just the imagination because of the firm contemplation of it through habit. Through habit. Now, we're not talking about flat earth versus round. Those people have, false ideas about the empirical world. I'm saying the empirical world itself exists only because it is known. Now, this gets into some pretty interesting physics. You'd have to talk to someone like Jack, who's a physicist. But science is starting to discover these truths that have been true about yoga for centuries. Now, the ramifications of this for us personally are enormous. We think my feelings, my beliefs are the effect of an external world. They are terrible people. They are out to get me. And yoga says, actually, it's the other way around. Through lifetimes, you've developed habituated modes of thought, which literally become the world you perceive. There's no external world out there, outside of consciousness. Some yogis stand back and just watch the show. Other yogis, the way I like to phrase it, they know, yes, this world is a dream, but they perceive it doesn't have to be a nightmare. And through sankalpa, through their intention, endeavor to make a difference in the world. Now, so many of my students have done these Goenka Vipassana retreats, but any Buddhist retreat usually ends with a metta meditation. Is that how it's pronounced? Who's been on a Vipassana retreat out there in Zoom land?
Yes, that's how it's pronounced, Jim.
Is that Fang?
Yes, Jim.
Okay, yeah. Share with us the metta meditation.
The metta meditation typically goes along the lines of may all beings be free from suffering. May all beings on any plane, large or small, invisible or not, human or not, be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and be at peace.
Yeah. Why do you do it?
Because it's heart opening.
It's so much more than that. It's a sankalpa. And do you do it at the beginning of the retreat or the end?
At the end.
Why do you think you do it at the end?
Because you have more single points of concentration by the end.
and your mind is quieter, and the quiet mind is the most powerful mind. The quiet mind that's at peace, its sankalpa is more enduring. It's not conflicted or contradicted. So the tradition is to do the metta meditation because it makes a difference in the world. It's not just that your heart gets open. I'm very grateful for the rest of us. And what yoga would say is, it has some effect in Ukraine, some effect on the mind of a Putin or a Trump or a Biden, some effect on people carrying guns in Oakland. If, on the other hand, you spend time in regret, plotting revenge, thinking, oh, it's just a fantasy, reviewing your miseries, rehashing traumas from childhood over and over and over again, convinced they were terrible people, I will never speak to them. Those are sankalpas. Or worrying about the future. I catastrophize. I always plan out how terrible it's going to be because I just know it's going to happen. I want to be prepared for it to be as terrible. Those are sankalpas. So a yogi, in the beginning, our work is about our relationship with the mind. I'm not the body, I'm not the prana, I'm not the feelings, I'm not the thoughts, I'm the witness. But as we move into more advanced work, we also pay attention to the content of the mind. Now, this is called Tantra. Probably the best known tantric tradition right now is Tibetan Buddhism. And they have all sorts of methodologies to focus sankalpa. They'll have these long ceremonies where they do lots and lots of mantras. They'll do these beautiful sand paintings. These are yantras. And they always begin and end any tantric meditation with a meditation on shunyata, the fundamental emptiness. Otherwise, you get caught up in the ego idea, I'll be happy when. So I'm going to do a sankalpa to get the Cadillac because the Cadillac's going to make me happy. Missed even the elementary point. Now, don't be afraid of your mind. But it's of value to see your mind as your best friend and as an instrument for the transformation of the world, if you wish. These are the deep implications of this teaching around Sankalpa. All right, we'll end here. What verse are we on for next week, please?
We are on 53.
All right. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. So, assignment. This metta meditation is a pretty darn good one. Share it with us again, please, Fang.
You mean how it goes?
Yes, just the words.
May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and be at peace. That's the simplest version.
Okay. Your assignment is when your mind tends towards negative thinking, bring your mind back and do the metta meditation for the good of the world. Just try it. All right. Hari Om.